Hey guys, it's Selwen here. Today let's talk about Shadow Priest, the masters of cheese and console fights. So what's it all about? Well, Shadow Priest is mainly about two things: keeping up dots, that is Vampiric Touch, dealing damage and healing you for a bit, plus Shadow Word Pain. These dots in combination with your other two abilities, Mind Blast, a direct damage ability, and Mind Flay, a Shadow-like ability, are gonna generate Insanity, that is your resource. Insanity on itself doesn't do much, but when you reach the cap, it allows you to use your Void form, triggered by Void Eruption, damaging all targets that possess your dots. That ability is then turned into Void Bolt, doing direct damage, instant, generating more Insanity and increases the duration of your dots. While in this form, your Insanity is going to be consumed every second until you reach 0 and you go back to your regular form, but by each passing second is going to consume more and more Insanity, but you're also going to do 20% more damage, reduce Mind Blast CD by 3 seconds, and gain 1% haste every second. Plus, the longer it stays up, the more damage you're going to do on your dots. Think of it as your cooldown that you're going to use quite frequently. Once it drops, you lose all of those benefits. Your artifact ability is only usable in this form called Void Torrent, working like a Mind Flay but stops the consumption of Insanity while it channels. Shadow Word Death is an execute-like ability only usable below 20% of health, also generating Insanity. Your only DPS cooldown is Shadow Fiend, a pet of sorts that deals damage, and your mastery increases your dot damage and Void Bolt. As for talents, there will be mainly 3 builds that you can use: your single target based one on Legacy of the Void, the most simple and viable, the Surrender to Madness build, arguably more fun but requires a higher level of skill and is not as viable anymore, and then your multi-target or Mythic plus build with just some changes from the Legacy of the Void build. So for your first build on tier 1, you would want Twist of Fate, increasing your damage by 20% after damaging a target below 35% of health, a solid addition, even though Fortress of the Mind can technically work on pure single target fights. To make it viable would require you to stay still for long periods of time for the Mind Flay damage increase, which is rare, but fine if you have the talent like a Rain. On tier 2, Body and Soul is easiest to use in raids or dungeons since you're gonna get an on-demand speed boost to get away from nasty stuff. Mania can also work as a passive option if there's gonna be a constant movement instead of short bursts. Next tier doesn't really matter for raiding. In general, Mind Bomb is the most useful, especially if there's ads, so great in dungeons. Fourth tier, Lingering Insanity will be best, so it periodically decays the haste that you gained through Void form that I talked earlier, instead of just dropping completely when you lose said Void form. Fifth tier, Auspicious Spirits will make your passive shadowy apparitions that procs from Shadow Word Pain crits do double the damage and generate 3 Insanity. Next tier would be Mindbender, replacing your Shadow Fiend for a more powerful pet, doing more damage, generates 8 Insanity with each hit, plus the cooldown is reduced by 1 minute. And lastly, Legacy of the Void increases your Void form damage by 5%, plus it reduces the requirements to use it by 65% Insanity instead of 100, meaning more frequent Void forms. As for the Surrender to Madness build, realistically is no longer really all that viable, but I'll talk about it anyway. And a couple of things will change. Now you want as many fast one-use Insanity generation talents as you can, so Reaper of Souls making your Shadow Worth Death usable earlier, plus generates 30 Insanity instead of 15. Senlean can work nicely here if you have a lot of mastery, but due to the recent nerfs on Vampiric Touch, might not be that worthwhile. Power Infusion for a cooldown, increasing your hastes and Insanity generation by 25% for 20 seconds, and then obviously Surrender to Madness. Lastly, for multi-target builds, so more than 3 targets, will basically be the Legacy of the Void build, but you want Misery instead, so when you do a Vampiric Touch, it applies a Shadow Word Pain with it. saving you a global cooldown. As for Shadow Crash, you can technically take it if you want a more bursty approach, but due to all the buffs to Void Eruption actually being a meaningful damaging ability on multi-target now, Legacy of the Void will be more valuable overall. And that covers it. Now let's talk about your rotation through all of those changes. First, let's go over single target, then your opener, and then multi-target. So like I said previously, your priority as a Shadow Priest will be on keeping up Void form. So before it, you need to set up your dots, Vampiric Touch and Shadow Word Pain, and just keep them up. Refreshing below 10 seconds will be enough, but is going to be rare anyway. Then you need to start building Insanity, so just do your Mind Blast and Mind Flay. Mind Blast you want to keep on cooldown at all times so you can maximize its uses. So as long as dots don't need refreshing, that's what you're gonna use. If you have the Legendary Waste, just use one charge and keep the cooldown rolling. Save the other while in Void form. As for Mind Flay is just a filler, so just use when nothing else to click. You also get the Tentacles, but nothing to worry about. Keep on doing those abilities until you reach 65% Insanity. When there, you use Void Eruption to enter Void form, but remember Mind Blast. Do it first if it's available to use, or if near the 2 charges cap, and you're not gonna overcap Insanity. Now your priorities will shift a bit. You're gonna gain Void Bolt, but right before you can use it, there's a global cooldown to take in mind on the ability itself. To fill that gap, you will immediately go for your cooldown, Void Torrent, and let it channel. During it, your Insanity is not gonna drop, and you want to use it whenever available to maximize its uses. Then, while in Void form, like I said, you're gonna do more damage, gain haste, and more dot damage passively. So the idea here is to stay in it for as long as possible, and your general priority will be on using your Void Bolts. Keeping dots won't be as much of an issue since the bolt refreshes their duration a bit, and giving a nice amount of Insanity to keep you up. You will overcap resources at this point, but doesn't really matter. Then you go for Mind Blast, and once again use it on cooldown, but Void Bolt takes priority here. They will most likely overlap cooldowns, which sucks. The Legendary Waste will fix this by giving you the 2 charges of Mind Blast, allowing you to bank 1 charge while you use the bolt and never lose out on its uses. Then just keep it up, use Mind Flay when nothing else available like before. As for refreshing dots, if you really do need, try to time them when both Mind Blast and Bolt are on cooldown, taking the Mind Flay priority. Now, when to use Mindbender, your other cooldown? Well, you never want to use it right after entering Void form because 1 is not going to do much since the Insanity consumption is rather low. Plus, you're gonna do Void Torrent, which stops at Insanity consumption. If you stack both of those cooldowns, you're just gonna overcap Insanity for nothing. So never ever stack those 2 CDs. You want to save it when you have around 20 to 30 stacks of the Void form buff, or whenever you see you having trouble keeping up your Insanity, and then just keep that going. The more haste you get, the more Insanity is gonna need, so just do the best you can to keep it up until Void form drops. Optimally, with good gear, you want to reach 50 to 60 stacks of Void form, so around 1 minute time. This also allows you to then always use both of your cooldowns, Mindbender and Void Torrent, with every Void form phase. In some moments, even use Void Torrent twice in the same phase. Obviously, depending on the fights and even MS as well, due to how fast it can get with high levels of haste. But that should be your goal in the long run. Once it does end, you're gonna go back to your old priorities and build Insanity again for another Void form. Thanks to lingering Insanity, you will get your stacks of haste that you gain even after Void form. They will slowly decay, but will give you a nice boost to build up for a new phase. You might not have your CDs ready, again depends on gear, so just use when available or use it on your third Void form phase. About Shadow Word Death is only usable in execute-like phases, and you want to save them for Void form mostly, for the extra Insanity. You have 2 charges, however, so when it's available, just use that first charge in or out of Void form to get the cooldown ticking. Then save the other for Void form, but later in the phase when Insanity cost is higher, taking priority after Mind Blast and Void Bolt. And that covers it. Now, as for your opener in boss fights, is basically the same really. You just want to precast a Mind Blast and only then apply your dots. This way you ensure that you get the cooldown rolling right away. Then just keep with the same rotation. Now, what about Surrender to Madness? Well, not much changes as well. For most of the fights you will not use it and will be the same as before, but worse due to the insanity cost for Void Form, but you should use it at the end of boss fights since you die straight after Void Form goes down, but you can make it last for much longer, since it increases your insanity generation by 200%, plus allows you to cast while on a move. So use around 30% of health to take advantage of Reaper of Souls talent for Shadow Word Death, or near it would be the best time, depends on the fight really, so you're gonna have to figure out by yourself. Now, when you do use Surrender to Madness and you out of Void Form, you get the buff for 3 minutes and its benefits, so you can use it quite early before actually entering the Void Form and get all that grace. A neat trick to use in your Artifact Challenge, for an example. Once you do, again, priorities will be the same. You're gonna get a new cooldown that is Power Infusion, and like Mindbender, you don't want to use in the beginning of your Void Form phase, but later on around 20 to 30 stacks. If you combo that with a Bloodlust and high stacks, you can actually remove the cooldown of Void Bolt entirely, which is what you should aim for, and you will do amazing DPS. You only need to weave a spell in the middle of it due to its natural global cooldown. That's achievable at 145% haste. As for Shadow Fiend, use whenever outside of Void Form, preferably right before a Surrender to Madness Void Form phase. But besides that, we'll just do more of the same, but it's gonna be more hectic and more fun, but the drawback is that you die, so be careful. Overall, not really worth to use anymore. Legacy of the Void gives off better DPS unless you want to have some cheesy fun. As for multi-targets, there's not much to it. The sweet spot would be 2 to 3 targets where you can maintain a normal rotation and just get more insanity, such as in console fights, that's where you shine the most. If more than that, like in a dungeon, use Misery to just multi-dot everything, your Mind Flay is gonna turn into Mind Seer for AoE all around the dotted target. All the rest stay the same like your Void Form. Just remember to dot everything for Void Eruption damage. Since the buffs to it, it does a lot of damage. Now, only 2 things to keep in mind: if there's more than 4 targets, Mind Flay Seer is gonna generate you more insanity than Mind Blast or Void Bolt, so you will stop casting Mind Blasts at that point, unless there's a priority target. Void Bolt you still want to use on cooldown just because it refreshes your dots on all targets around 8 yards, so saves you refreshes. The other thing is on mob health. If they have a small HP pools, it's not worth to dot with Vampiric Touch. Just go for Shadow Word Pain and then, depending on the mob count, Mind Blast or Mind Seer. If they super weak, just Shadow Word Pain 1 for Mind Seer since it's required to make it work. As for Shadow Crash, just use on cooldown. And that covers it all. Now for advanced topics and stats. So there's a couple of things left to be said. One is in utility, to remember your Dispel and Mass Dispel, alright? It's so goddamn useful in mythic dungeons specifically, and so many priests don't use it. The other is on Dispersion, mainly a defensive cooldown, but also freezes your insanity. Now, it doesn't make you gain more stacks while it's active, but halts the consumption of said insanity. So you can use it to pause your Void Form, if you so wish, to try and fit a Void Torrent after, or an extra Void Bolt, or whatever you might plan. And finally, Vampiric Embrace provides a good amount of raid healing, so just use it well in combination with a fat Void Form. On the tier 21, just damage increases, so not much to talk about. As for stats, haste will obviously reign supreme. Faster global cooldowns and reduction of Void Bolt cooldown is a must here. More haste will equal longer Void Form phases due to higher insanity generation. Crit will benefit you nicely here as well due to shadowy apparitions from your Shadow Word Pain crits, which equals more insanity as well as damage, obviously. And finally, Mastery for more dot damage and Void Bolt. These three are the main stats you should be looking for. Versatility and Intellect or item level is the least valuable to you. In general, some of these stats will devalue at certain points, like Haste around 12k or 16k, depending if you have the tier set or not, to allow you to reach the 1 minute of Void Form. And the other stats will act like this as well, so remember to sim. In terms of legendaries, Wasteland Cephex's Ring is generally the best for a single target. Remember that Mind Bomb procs it, and the chest is best for multi-target, in combo with Cephex as well, and the rest are okay and don't require much explaining. So guys, that covers it all. I hope it was helpful. Check in the description for my add-ons. Have fun, and as always, have a fantastic day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.